Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and we are here for my NACL rounds 3 and 4 overview and analysis. I really appreciate you guys. I know a lot of fans have kind of been complaining about how some regions have maybe gotten more videos than others, but you know, some of these regions move incredibly quickly. I feel especially bad, though, for you NACL fans. You basically had to wait an entire week. You've basically waited through, 2.5 rounds of your playoffs in order to get a video here. I hope I can make it up to you in this one, because in this video, we're going to be covering the end of round 2, which I still haven't covered, all of round 3, both of the series there, and then all of round 4 as well. So everything that has happened all through last weekend. Incredibly excited to go over it just in time for us to start getting into the big best of fives towards the back half of the playoffs. Incredibly excited to go over it. I hope you guys are as well. Not only are we going to be covering every single best of 3 that happened, but the first 2 best of 5s also happened in this week. So we're going to be covering them in this video. I am super excited to go over it with you guys. But of course, let me know down in the comment section below what you guys thought of all of these games. We're going to be covering a lot, some teams multiple times in this video, and so I do really hope that you guys are pumped and excited. By the end of this video, we're going to know who the top 4 teams in the NACL are. But that's a little ways away. We've got 10 full series to cover, 2 of those being best of 5, so let's go ahead and kick on with the video. Starting, of course, with the end of round 2. We didn't cover who ended up going out. We know the first 4 teams out. Who are the next 4 teams out going to be? We saw how winners round 2 ended. It's time to get into losers round 2. And kicking off losers round 2, we had a matchup between TSM Challengers and Wildcard Gaming. An incredibly interesting matchup on paper, much less so in the game, because Wildcard absolutely destroys them in this one. It really isn't all that close. They are the much better team in this, and that's very reassuring, I think, to me. Obviously, TSM with a pretty massive upset in round number 1, being able to take down CLG. Not a lot of people saw that coming, me included. I thought this was for sure the worst Challengers team in the NACL, but Evil Geniuses obviously coming in, definitely kind of claiming that role going out into the bottom 4. TSM kind of showing that maybe they are right there with them, though, in that round 1 series was a little bit of an upset and a little bit of a shock, because this is not a pretty good team, especially, they get destroyed by 100 Thieves, rightfully so, that's what we expected, but getting destroyed by Wildcard, a pretty feast or famine team, I would have at least liked to see a fight be put up here. But let's go ahead and talk about Wildcard. This team's just so fun to watch. I know I've been very critical of them, and honestly, I feel bad at times because, I want to get the point across that they are ridiculously fun and that they are good for the NACL, and they're very good for the NA scene in general, and I think a lot of these players have massive upside when it comes to the LCS, while also trying to get across the point that maybe they're not title favorites, right? It's a difficult line, I think, to balance there. Anytime you criticize a player or criticize a team, all of a sudden you're a hater, and then anytime you praise them, all of a sudden you're, like, all in on them. I'm somewhere in the middle on Wildcard. I love these players. I don't know if they're a top 5 or 6 team in the NACL. That might be a little rich for my taste. But it's really good to see them be able to perform against a Challengers team that, while they've certainly had their ups and downs, this is a team that did win a series in the playoffs this split, and that's certainly not something you can take for granted. My player of the series is going to go to Lens in the bot lane. I've been very critical of this bot lane, quite frankly. I've been very complimentary, I would say, to Keel and Saligo in particular, and then obviously Moose Hater has had some phenomenal games. He's also had some pretty bad games, but I would say that was pretty flipped in this series. Lens and Duo King were definitely the focal point for Wildcard on that scaling. Jinx is one of those picks we're going to be talking about a lot over the course of this patch. And, rightfully so. Jinx and Xayah, I think, are the 2 names that come to mind. A little bit of Aphelios, but those are the 2 big names that come to mind, and Lens piloted it at a really high level. It's just really good to see this bot lane continue to improve. They've always had talent. Lens has had some unreal games in the regular season. I just always wanted to see them put it together a little bit more. This team doesn't necessarily spend a lot of their resources in the bot lane either, and so it was always a little bit of a balancing act to try to get them noticed, maybe over someone like Saligo or Keel, who do get a lot of the resources for Wildcard. But, when Lens and Duo King have been given the reins, when they've been given the opportunity to take over, they've done a really good job. Also want to give a big shout out to Moose Hater in the top lane. No Garen, no problem, and that is a really good feeling for me. Now, I love Moose Hater. I don't want anyone to misconstrue that. I really love Moose Hater. I think he is the perfect NACL player. He is someone who brings attention to the league, who is a super fun personality to root for and cheer for, and obviously he's gaining ridiculous amounts of popularity globally because of that Garen pick, but he certainly has had his ups and downs over the course of this split, especially when off of some of his more unconventional picks, even things like the Malphite, when he's off of stuff like that, it's not looked nearly as coherent, but this was a really good series into a really good top laner. It's not like he's facing some schmuck in the top lane. He's facing Haunter, who just had a really good end of season in the LCS for TSM, and so Moose Hater, honestly, with a really good series. Him, Lens, and Duo King definitely the standouts on the side of Wildcard, and they're going to be super happy to be moving on here. As for TSM on the other side, your split ends here, but honestly, this is further than I expected you to get. I thought this team was not going to be able to perform in playoffs. I was really worried about this jungle mid duo, and obviously they didn't necessarily perform in this series, but they did outdo my expectations going into this. Neo in particular had a really good playoff series, and Haunter is maybe the best top laner in the NACL. He's certainly in the conversation. At the bare minimum, he's in the conversation, and so TSM definitely outperformed my expectations, but unfortunately in this one, Wildcard was just a little bit too hot to handle. I gave my dud of the series to Dragku, but I think this could go to Neo, this could go to Svenskeren, it could go to Doxa, right? Like, you could give this to almost anybody on the side of TSM. It just didn't feel like they were all that coherent. They kind of got blown out in both games. Game 1 especially was not particularly close. They lost jungle pressure very early on, and then Sven tried a lot of plays to be able to bring it back. It wasn't really working. Doxa just was super inactive on the map. Sligo had so much more pressure, and Lens and Duo King dominated that bot lane matchup. Neo trying to answer with 2 hyper carries of his own, but just wasn't going to be nearly as effective. I ended up giving it to Dragku because I felt like some of his engages on the Alistar in Game 2 were just not good. You need to be proficient at that champion, and it didn't feel like he was. And then the Annie in Game 1, I'm a little bit lower on the Zeri Annie lane. I think it can be really, really strong to play, when you're playing against high-level opponents, but you've got to be able to execute on that bot lane, and it's just kind of difficult. It's not the easiest bot lane to execute on, and so I'm a little bit more adverse to people kind of pulling it out in win-or-go-home situations. But for TSM, I still think you consider this a relative success, what with all the drama surrounding the team going into the split. For you to not be bottom 4, I think that's definitely a plus. You basically had to replace your mid lane like a couple of days before the season started. You weren't able to get, your support in, your AD carry got swapped out. Like, there was so much going on with this team, and obviously so many hurdles and road bumps that, for them to not be one of the worst teams in the league, I think is a positive, but obviously this organization is going to be looking for more next split. As for Wildcard on the other side, really good to keep alive here. Obviously, the road does not get easier at any point. Not exactly sure how far this team is actually going to be making it in playoffs, but they've still surpassed, I think, a lot of people's expectations going into the year. And then moving on to our second series of Losers Round 2 here, of the lower bracket Round 2, I should say. And this is another intriguing matchup. Two teams that I actually thought were going to be really close in the preseason. One of them definitely exceeding those expectations for me. We had Golden Guardians Challengers taking on Immortals Challengers. Two teams that I think really are moving in different directions. Obviously, a little bit of turmoil coming out from Immortals, but Golden Guardians definitely had to work for this one. They do end up taking the series 2-1, but I didn't think this series was going to be particularly close. I thought Golden Guardians should have been able to have this one in the bag. It felt like they were just a really good team that got unlucky to run into a team like Fear in the upper bracket, but shout out to Immortals. This was a really competitive and a really fun series to watch, and honestly, big props to them. They really don't have a lot of reason to be this competitive. I do really like a lot of the players on their team. Wixie, in particular, has, I think, really impressed me in recent weeks. Everybody knows I've always been a big fan of Joey. That's been forever, and then Yasui coming back is a great story, but he's only played with the team for, a week? He hasn't had a ton of time to be able to integrate himself into the dynamic of how this team operates in terms of the calls, in terms of decision-making, who's talking in certain scenarios. That can be a pretty difficult thing, especially in games as tense as playoff games. And with ADD and Chad, I think, definitely struggling over the course of this split so far, it's really crazy good to see this team step up and kind of play up to standards in this series. But we'll talk about Golden Guardians Challengers first. This team is just really, really fun to watch. I was really low on this roster going into the year. I think I had them ranked as the lowest Challengers team preseason, which is obviously not a good take now, but I think a lot of that is the surprising bounce back of the top lane here in Concept. He's going to get my player of the series in a playoff series for Golden Guardians. That's absolutely massive considering where he was at last year, and even at the beginning of the split, these very eclectic picks coming out in 2022, the Mundos, the Malphites, those are the things that you were seeing come out from Concept, and really he didn't feel super comfortable when he would move out of his pocket pick zone, and that was kind of the case at the beginning of the split too, but then it felt like something clicked, right around week 2, week 3, something clicked in Concept. He got a lot better at being weak side, and then now it's week 7 and 8, and now, this guy's a lot better at being strong side. You can actually give him resources. You can put him on something like Olaf, and he's actually going to be able to dominate. You can give him Cassante, and he's going to brutalize that matchup in Game 2. It's just really, really good stuff from a player that I think we were all looking for massive improvement with. I was kind of surprised to see this organization bring Concept back, but the talent has absolutely proven himself at this point. A great series from him, and he's really kind of cemented himself as a top laner to watch in the NACL. You love to see this kind of growth from players. Sometimes you get worried that players that aren't performing immediately might never, have that click, but it's all part of the process. Not every player is going to immediately be able to play at the level. The level of growth that he has been able to show over the past year is incredibly astounding and incredibly fun to watch. Another player that has just grown a lot over the course of the year, in my opinion, is Young in the mid lane. I was really excited about him in the early weeks of the season. Obviously, not a lot of hype going into the year, but weeks 1, 2, 3, even him playing in the LCS gave me a lot of hope that, he's one of the more interesting mid lane prospects in the entirety of North America right now. Now, obviously, he didn't have the best end of the year. I think that he definitely went on a little bit of a cold spell at the end of the regular season, but that's been, relatively not the case in the playoffs. He's been pretty good for this GGC team, and that was the case again here. He was probably the MVP of game number 3 on that LeBlanc, so big credit to him and Concept. They were definitely the two carry players, and it's really nice to see that. Rosethorn's been stepping it up over the back half of the split. Array and Prismal have been one of the more interesting bot lanes in the entire league, even if they weren't the carries and the focal points in this one. I actually think, we'll talk about it, but Immortal's bot lane played really awesome in this series, and Array and Prismal, not necessarily perfect in this one, but overall, you just got to give a lot of props to Golden Guardians. This organization stuck with the talent, they knew who they wanted to play, and they went with it. As for Immortals on the other side, I already laid out a bunch of reasons why this team should not have been competitive. New mid laner, inexperienced players, your best player just left for the LCS, the player that was kind of gluing it together, and, maybe some players that aren't performing on the top side, but none of that really mattered. They were super competitive in this series. I want to give a huge shout out to the bot lane of Wixie and Joey, because some of those games were absolutely ludicrous from them. They tried their best to be able to generate a big enough lead for Immortals to be able to move on. Unfortunately, it just wasn't enough, and it wasn't the rest of the team that was letting them down. It was more so just Golden Guardians playing at a really high level, but Wixie and Joey have a very bright future, I think, as a duo. I'm interested to see how they're going to grow moving into the summer split now, but unfortunately, I do have to give a dud of the series, and for me, it's going to go to Yusui in the mid lane. I really feel bad doing this because new player on the team, I wanted, kind of level the playing field, level the expectations for him, but he just wasn't really all that active in this series. A 23, participating in 23 kills across these 3 games in particular is just not enough for me. He wasn't getting in on a lot of the action. The Tristana, the LeBlanc, it didn't necessarily show up, especially with Young being able to pull out that LeBlanc in game 2 and honestly just do what he was doing better. I don't think Yusui had a particularly awful series in terms of gameplay. I don't think that he made any sort of grandiose mistakes, and I even think that his game 1 on the Rise was pretty solid. It was just the consistency coming out from him. I think if he were to have more time on this team, he obviously would be a lot better. We know that he is a solid player for this level because he has been for many, many years before, but unfortunately, it did very much feel like he was a little bit disconnected from the rest of his team and from his jungler in particular, who was playing a lot of these more aggressive picks like the Graves and the Kindred, and unfortunately, that's just not going to be a recipe for success in the playoffs. But overall, Immortals is probably going to be walking away from this split feeling all right. Certainly not the best split in the entire world, but again, you lost your best player right before playoffs. Who knows what this team could have been able to do? You drew a lot of series this year, you ended up going 500 in the regular season, and you drop out approximately where you were supposed to. It's definitely not a bad season for Immortals, but compared to what they were in previous years as an organization, maybe you're going to be looking for some improvement come summer. And then as for Golden Guardians, again, you're moving on here, and that's really good. This is not a particularly big surprise. This is a very good team that should not be out in the bottom 8, that really should not even be on the radar for Golden Guardians, and it's really good to see them perform, but most notably, it's good to see players like Concept, Rosethorn, and Young step up. I have a lot of faith in Array and Prismal to be able to kind of bounce back and be really big playmakers for this team as the playoffs go on, but to see everybody else holding their weight is a massive dub for this Golden Guardians team. And then moving on to our third series of round 2 losers, or bottom bracket round 2. Another intriguing matchup, one where the lower seed is actually somehow the higher matchup because they come from winner's bracket. We had Team Liquid Challengers taking on counter Logic Gaming Challengers. And TL does pick up the win. The 9 seed takes down the 6 seed, and CLG goes out in the bottom 8. I mean, that's a disaster. There really is no other way to put it. We can talk about how this is kind of normal for this organization at this point, but at some point you have to stand up and go, you gotta change. Like, you can't continuously lose these major series in the playoffs. I can no longer expect the Scrim Gods to be able to show up on stage when everybody tells me that they're going to show up if they've not really proven it. It's frustrating, but here we are again. We'll talk about them in a bit. Obviously, losing to TSM earlier in the tournament is way more detrimental than losing to Team Liquid, who is a genuinely really good team. But still, you shouldn't be in this predicament in the first place, and it is, at the end of the day, entirely your fault. So let's go ahead and cover it. Team Liquid looked really good in this game, and it's a lot of the players that have continued to look really good. Again, more of a team effort coming out from TLC, but their main carry is and has been all split. It's been APA. He's been really, really good. He's been LCS ready. Like, I think that there are a lot of players that kind of get that tag thrown around on top of them, but I think for APA, he's earned that tag. He is LCS ready. I think he has proven basically everything that he can, not only at this level, but even before this level, right? Like, he was dominating amateur for so many years. Finally gets an opportunity because he waited to get on a good organization. He gets on Team Liquid, an org that is notorious for producing incredibly good players out of their academy and their, amateur systems, their challenger systems, and APA definitely feels like the next generation of that. He's the best player on this team, in my opinion, and another really good series from him. You can talk about the Syndra Game 1, but the Cassie Game 3, I mean, that's just classic APA, pulling out the Cassiopeia, being able to control the game, especially into something like Talia that wants to shove and roam, wants to play with her jungler, wants to get out on the map and kind of create some chaos. I think you're really relying a lot on the Cass in that circumstance, and APA, I think, did a really good job of being able to back that up. He is awesome, and as long as he is right, as long as he's playing some good League, this TLC team is going to go a lot farther than a lot of people are going to give them credit for. Arrow and Kim Down continue to be solid. I feel like the playoffs have really solidified their duo status a little bit more. It felt like during the season, and I talked about this a lot, it always felt like one or the other was playing well. Kim Down had some awesome games, and it felt like Arrow wasn't following up on a lot of the great plays that he was making, and then Arrow would be smurfing in terms of his positioning and the amount of damage he was outputting, but Kim Down was just not holding up his end of the bargain, specifically in the early laning phases. It finally feels like both of them are on the right path together, and I think that is a very dangerous thing to say about a team that doesn't even particularly give a lot of resources into their bot lane. Mir, I think, has grown a lot over the course of the split, has gotten more used to playing here in NA, and has gotten a lot better. And then Bradley's just been incredibly consistent, one of the best top laners in the entire region, and he looked really good in this. TLC is a very dangerous unit. There aren't a lot of teams in the league that are going to be able to deal with them at all, like in any of these matchups, and that's not a normal thing coming from a 9 seed. I know they may have disappointed a bit in the regular season, but trust me, this team is as good as they come right now in the playoffs. As for CLG, you're out. You're the number 6 seed, and you're out here, and that's just unacceptable. Like, really, there is no other word to say for it. Losing 2 series in the playoffs, 1 to TSM, Team Liquid you can excuse a little bit more, but just what happened to the CLG team? Where's the fight? Like, yes, you kind of dominated game 2 and you looked pretty good doing it, but everything else just did not go well for this team. I think Meech and Breezy are solid. Meech in particular is ridiculous mechanically, but he'll just make some random mistakes sometimes that leave you flustered. Breezy, I think, is incredibly underrated, but the rest of this team did not show up in this series, in my opinion. Jenkins, I'm not going to blame too much. He was on tank duty the entire series, but Kevy and Copy have a lot of responsibility on the CLG team. Copy in particular, who was kind of the main focal carry for CLG throughout the regular season. Meech was great, but Copy was the one generating a lot of the leads for Meech to be able to capitalize on in the late game, and for him to just kind of not have a good playoffs, it's just really disappointing. Copy, I really, really, really am hoping that he's not going to become one of these players that is just kind of the gatekeeper of the NACL, right? No flame to any of the players that fall into that category, players like Saligo, players like King, these players that are fake gods in that category, players who are just a little bit too good for the NACL, but maybe not good enough to be permanent starters in the LCS. I really hope that's not Copy. Obviously, he's never been given a shot to play at the LCS level, but it just feels like when the games get more important, it doesn't necessarily translate. This kind of happened on C9 as well, and so I don't know. Again, maybe I'm just overreading into it. I love him as a player. I thought he had maybe his best year in the NACL, his best regular season in the spring of this split, where he was actually given a ridiculous amount of responsibility for this team, and he absolutely came through for them in most occasions, but it's just another poor series coming out from him, and he's going to get the dud of the series here. Overall, CLG's just going to be frustrated and flustered with the fact that they weren't able to actively win this series, that they're out in the bottom 8. You got to be able to regroup. I mean, summer is going to be massive for this team and for this org because they invest so much into this team. They feel like they have a lot of talent every year, and regular season always goes well, and then we hit the playoffs and something falls apart. I don't know where the mental block is for CLG, but they're going to have to find it out in summer because spring is over for them. As for TL, they're moving on, and this is not a team to look past. This is one of the most dangerous teams in the entire tournament right now, period. End of story. I know they're the 9th seed. I know they went 8-12 in the regular regular season, but they can beat a lot of teams that are ahead of them in the standings, and I would predict them to be able to beat a lot of teams that are ahead of them in the standings. Some really good play coming out from APA. Arrow and Kim Down are playing better. Mir is playing better. Bradley's always been consistent. Team Liquid on firing at full cylinders is incredibly scary. One of the top teams, talent-wise, in the entire league. It is really fun to see them put it together right at the right time. And then moving on to our fourth series and our final series of round 2 here. Excited to go over it. It is an interesting matchup, but one that I think we all kind of saw coming. We had FlyQuest Challengers taking on AOE Gold. AOE did a great job to be able to get here. It's not easy for a provisional amateur team to be able to make it to this spot, especially one that actually has backing from an LCS org, as we've seen from the other 3 in the league that didn't make it out of the bottom 4, but AOE able to get over another Challengers team in Evil Geniuses in the previous round. Unfortunately, it's not going to be enough to get past FlyQuest, who is a legitimate contender in this playoffs. I think a lot of people were talking about them as one of the favorites, like genuinely one of the favorites going into the playoffs, even though they were one of the lower seeds. Winsome coming in's been great, and Masu getting his visa to actually be able to play without being on 7 billion ping is also great, and I promise we'll get to Masu. Actually, you know what, screw it, we'll get to him right now. Let's talk about FlyQuest, and let's talk about the player of the series in Masu in the bot lane. Come on, man! He's unfair, he's so good! I was questioning this organization at the beginning of the year. I was like, they have somebody who just played an LCS, and you're playing him in your, FlyQuest amateur team, whereas you have this unproven AD carry that, I haven't really watched a lot of tape of, quite frankly. In your Challengers team, it just felt like a weird kind of way to go about it. God, was I wrong. I mean, holy crap, were they 1,000,000% right about Masu. He is just unreal. He is genuinely probably the best prospect in the NACL. Considering a lot of the other players that are kind of great right now in the NACL, I wouldn't consider prospects. Masu, in terms of players that we haven't seen on the LCS stage, in terms of players that kind of came out of nowhere this year, it's not even a question. Like, he is the breakout star of 2023 in North America. And the only thing that I feel bad for is the fact that he's got to play behind Prince at the LCS level. He's never going to get a shot on FlyQuest to play at LCS, but, shout out to him. He's done basically everything he can do at the NACL level. He dominates in another playoff series. I would have liked to see him play a little bit better against Dignitas, but that's just me being nitpicky. I think everything that he has done over the course of the year so far has been sensational. Whether that's in the regular season, whether that's in the playoffs, you could make a really strong argument that he is the single best AD carry in the NACL, and I don't think a lot of people are going to push back on you with that. Ezreal has been a big pick for him, but even the Xayah has also been really, really nice in this series. Just generally, he's just better than everyone that he's playing against. Lynx and Skytech are 2 players that I actually think, or Lynx in particular, is kind of underrated, I think, by the community. I certainly don't think that he is a negative for this team, but Masu is just on a different level. It was almost unfair watching these 2 go up against each other. Winsome definitely helps, but maybe not so much in this series. We'll talk about him in a second, but Masu's just been great, and I think no matter who he is playing with, he has proven that he is going to be one of the best AD carries at this level. He better be in LCS sooner rather than later. I'm going to be incredibly upset. But as for Winsome, he was actually kind of bad in this series. He wasn't bad. I think bad is maybe a large term. That might be a little bit too broad for what I'm going for. Some of the engages definitely weren't great. I think he was over-eager in a lot of these moments. Obviously, Rakan steals coming from both sides. Rakan never getting to play with Xayah in either of these games, and so Winsome ends up on the Rakan in game 1. Good engages, but man, some of them were just really punished. In game 2, I mean, he was throwing away gold on the Leona. I love him to death, and, I still think Winsome's a pretty good player, but this was not a great game from him. Luckily, everybody else on FlyQuest was playing well. SpearX had a great game. Philip was unreal in this series. I mean, he has just completely ramped back up to the Philip that we knew in summer of last year over the course of the second half of the split. I was actually, not to say I was getting concerned, because I don't think he was playing bad at all. He was just kind of a good top laner, and I was like, I want you to be more than a good top laner. I want you to be the best top laner in the NACL like you should be, and it really feels like he's gotten a lot closer to that ever since the final weeks of the season have really started come rolling in. So, Philip, SpearX, Masu, unfair. So good. I mean, UG and SpearX, if they can get on the right track and be consistent, this team is legitimately unbeatable. That's really the only thing holding them back at this point, is just the consistency. It's not the talent. It will never be the talent with FlyQuest. As for AOE on the other side, unfortunately, he just ran into maybe the best team at this stage of the tournament. It's a really unfortunate matchup, but you know what? Like, this is about where you probably thought you were going to be going out. It means that you are one of the bottom 4 provisional teams. You are going to have to fight for your life in relegation, but I'll be honest, this team should be able to stay up. I think they should be better than a lot of the amateur teams that I've checked out in the qualifiers so far. I really do like a lot of these players. I think Darkwings in particular is someone who's really caught my eye, but obviously players like Winnie and Skytech have been around, Gamsu obviously, and Lynx I think did impress me quite a bit over the course of the NACL in comparison to maybe what my expectations were of him as a player. Unfortunately, I do have to give a dud of the series for this one, and that's going to go to Gamsu in the top lane. Philip was absolutely the better top laner in the series, and it wasn't particularly close. You signed Gamsu to be a veteran presence, to be someone who can maybe guide some of these younger players that didn't have as much NACL experience in order to kind of, get them solidified, and I do think he accomplished that a bit over the course of the year, but again, more so than almost any other top laner, Gamsu is either the best or the worst. Like, there were some games where he was utterly dominant, he was, crushing other top laners and looking like one of the best in the entire league, and then he would go another series where he was, like, unplayable, like, he looked like one of the worst. It's just a back and forth with him, and I think if he's able to land on, the more positive aspects, that's going to be great, but for a team like AOE that might be wanting to move in a different direction, it might be interesting to see this team look for maybe a new top laner. Again, I don't think that's necessary by any means. Gamsu is more than suitable, but just something to keep in mind. I think overall AOE is probably going to be fine when it comes to the relegation tournament. This team is just simply better than a lot of the amateur teams in terms of talent, in my opinion, and honestly, they looked fine in this series. There's not really a lot to say on their part. They did fight back quite a bit in game number 2, and Darkwings and Lynx, we're definitely going out there and trying their best, Lynx in particular, on the Jinx, but it just wasn't ever going to be enough against a team like FlyQuest. I'm not going to hold this loss against them, and I think this is about where they probably thought they were going to land at the end of the spring split. And then for FlyQuest on the other side, you're gonna hope, you've only got one life, obviously, because you've been knocked down to the lower bracket, but at the end of the day, like, this team could absolutely make a run to finals. Like, there is nothing stopping this team other than themselves. If they're playing right, if Masu in particular is playing at a ridiculously high level and you're getting these kinds of contributions out of your solo laners, it is doomed for the rest of the league. And so, if you're a FlyQuest fan, you're probably hoping that you're going to get that. I'm probably leaning towards you probably getting that. Of course, they're not perfect. They're going to have some ups and downs, but man, this team is incredibly scary when they work. But now that we have found out the teams that are moving on from the lower bracket in round 2, it's time to find out which 2 of those teams are going to get eliminated immediately after. It's a crazy weekend for all of those teams in the lower bracket. The gauntlet has for sure started, and that means round 3 is kicking off here. Round 2 being done. Round 3 is just the 2 matchups between the 4 teams we just talked about winning. 2 of those teams are immediately going to get eliminated as they're facing off against each other. So let's kick it off with our first series of round 3, a matchup between FlyQuest Challengers and Wildcard Gaming. The FlyQuest Challengers is able to win 2 back-to-back series that we get to talk about, some FlyC wins. I'm certainly very happy about that. This team is incredibly fun to talk about. They're incredibly fun to watch. The only thing that I feel bad about is the fact that they're layered together because it's a very similar message that I'm going to be talking about in this one, which is Masu looking really freaking good, like way too freaking good for this level. As much as I like Lens, and I do think that he's probably gotten a bad rap over the year, I'm not as crazy high on him as some of the other NACL analysts are. I think that he's a good player. I definitely haven't been sold on him being like top 5, but I do think that he is someone who could easily be top 5 by the end of the year if things continue to grow. But it's just a difference, right? Like, the difference between Lens and Masu still is pretty massive, and that was shown off in this series. Masu is just so good at Ezreal. Like, it is honestly unfair to watch him get to play this Ezreal. It is super duper fun to watch him get to do it, but he can play that, he can play late game carries, he can be aggressive in lane, he can be, more scaling oriented. He just does everything at such a high level. His mechanics, his IQ, his ability to recognize what the other team wants to do and when he is under pressure and when he is under fire, and the team that plays around him understanding that if you give him the time, he's going to be able to kind of, make it worth your while, if you will. It's just awesome. Like, FlyQuest Challengers just plays so fun right now. That's why they were able to pick up the pretty clean 2-0 win here. Is, again, this bot lane. If you can get him rolling, you're probably going to win that game. And they got him rolling in both of these games. And it was really simple. Again, it wasn't only Masu. I don't want it to come across like I'm just sitting here saying it's a one-man team. This is not a one-man FlyQuest team. Philip has been sensational in this playoff run. I think he has genuinely been one of the better top laners in the entire region. I know I've said that a couple of times today, but for Philip, I absolutely mean it, especially in terms of recent form. He's been right up there with basically anybody. That level 1 cheese play on Fiora just, I mean, it ended Moose Hater's game immediately. The Malphite was never going to be able to play from that point onwards again, and the Wukong was going to struggle from that point onwards for the rest of the game. Just really fun stuff coming out from FlyQuest Challengers. Masu and Philip in particular are the two that stand out, but SuperKmanrocks has been great over the course of this playoff run. Yuji's been very consistent, which is all I really asked him to be. I just didn't want some of the more, costing mistakes that he was kind of bringing out in the regular season. Again, I think I have to remind a lot of people who may have not been around since the preseason for me, since my spring preseason predictions, but I talked about Yuji and SuperKmanrocks being my two big breakout players of 2023. I thought this team was going to be fantastic, but for a different reason. I thought jungle mid, this was the year they get it together. They both really grew a lot over the course of 2022, and I thought this was the year where they both emerged as some of the best players in their roles in the region. While that may have not exactly panned out, I certainly don't think that they are bad by any stretch. It just so happened that, bot lane was a little bit more of the focal point for FlyQuest this split. Winsome's looking all right. He's been put on more meatball tanks, some protection tanks, and I think that that is a great role for someone like him who's going to be a little bit more over-aggressive. It just gives Masu even more tools to be able to play super aggro and to be able to play, basically exactly how he wants. And so credit to FlyC, they've really found a strategy that works. And if you get these guys rolling, the snowball is going to go out of control. As for Wildcard on the other side, speaking of snowballs, Nunu was banned the entire series, and it definitely looked like it, clearly FlyQuest did their homework and they didn't want to give Wildcard any of their signature picks, so they settled towards playing a more standard game with some more standard picks. Now, obviously, pulling out the Malphite in the top lane, not exactly the most standard thing in the world. It's becoming a lot more normal, I would say, but still a Moose Hater classic. Same with the Blitzcrank, obviously, for Duo King, but I would say Wildcard just didn't necessarily look up to par in this series, and that's kind of what we expected. Again, going into this, FlyQuest was major favorites, and I think that was for good reason. My dud of the series, unfortunately, I think is going to go to Moose Hater. His game in Game 2 was just completely ruined by that level 1. I feel so bad for him. It really wasn't his fault. Like, it's hard to blame him. I think Keel had a pretty bad series overall. Saligo was super negative. I mean, he was dying a lot more than he had any right to, playing way too aggro and positioning way too aggressively on picks like the Victor and the Syndra that just don't really have any proper escape tools if you are engaged on by, I don't know, a Fiora or a Jace or a Gragas or Tom Kench, right? Like, if they get on you, what do you do about that? And so, didn't really like that, and I think that's a big problem for Wildcard when those two aren't playing well, Keel and Saligo in particular. It's just very difficult for this team to consistently be able to win games, not because the other players aren't good, but just because I think they run a lot of the offense that ends up coming through for Wildcard. A lot of the aggressive plays come out of that part of the map, and so unfortunate for them, but because they have outlasted AOE, they have officially become one of the top 2 amateur provisional teams in the NACL, which means they do not have to play for their relegation lives. They are confirmed to spot in summer in the NACL, and that's huge for any provisional team, no matter kind of how they finished. Wildcard at points in time was looking like a top 4, top 5 team in the league. Obviously, things didn't end up panning out like that. The volatility was just a little bit too much, but you've got to give a lot of credit to this organization. They took a lot of players who really burst onto the scene with a fantastic proving grounds last year, and they showed that it wasn't a fluke. They are absolutely players that can compete and deserve to be at this level. I imagine they'll be running back the same 5 over the course of summer, and I'm really excited to see this team continue to grow. If they can iron out some of the kinks, I mean, this could be a top 3, top 4 team in the NACL very, very quickly if they can capitalize on the positive plays that they make and weed out some of the negative ones. But Wildcard is always going to be the most fun team to watch in the NACL. That is for certain. And then for FlyQuest on the other side, their path continues to move forward. They're not out of the woods yet. It's a very active weekend, for these teams in lower bracket. They're going to have one more series that we're going to talk about, but to be able to win 2 series already in one weekend, that's incredible resilience. It's incredible precision, consistency, whatever you want to call it. Masu, I mean, if you weren't going to give him MVP before, I mean, I don't know if you can count playoff performances, but holy shit, he has been phenomenal. He has proven to everybody who he really is. Philip, SuperKmanrocks, Yuji, Winsome, everybody's playing at a high level. FlyQuest is one of the more scary teams, especially in the lower bracket right now. And now moving on to our final matchup of round 3, our second matchup of round 3, and we're going to determine who's going to be joining Wildcard for tied 7th, 8th place in the league. Is it going to be Golden Guardians Challengers, or is it going to be Team Liquid Challengers? Well, the winner was Team Liquid, as you can see up on the screen right now. Really fun series, but TL is so underrated compared to what they actually are. 9 seed, are you kidding? I get it, right? regular season. They weren't able to win that tiebreaker against Wildcard that they really needed to win. But 9 seed, like, they are so much more talented than that, and they are clearly showing that in the playoffs right now. Golden Guardians is not a pushover team by any means, but their split ends today a little bit more abruptly than maybe they would have wanted it to at the hands of Team Liquid. So let's go ahead and talk about what happened. It's similar, threads and similar threats coming out from TL. A lot of the players that have been pushing them forward in recent weeks, and especially throughout the playoffs so far, continued. And obviously the whole team played well. There wasn't really a weak link player. You don't have a weak link player when you go 2-0 against Golden Guardians Challengers, but it's APA in the mid lane, and it's Mir in the jungle, who had a phenomenal performance yet again. I really like APA's champion pool. It's not exactly, super unique, right? Like, he still plays mid lane champions. It's not like he's pulling out, like, Xayah mid or something like that. But, being able to pull out the Ziggs, and obviously we know about the Aurelion Soul. Like, we know he can play some of these more eccentric picks that maybe aren't as meta right now. ASL, debatably. But, Ziggs not meta at all in the mid lane. We're really not seeing that from any region in the world. And APA is pulling it out consistently, and he's doing very well on it. He did very well in this series. This was a mid-gap, if I've ever seen one, and APA was definitely on the positive side of that, but he's just been the guy for TL. Luckily, he was honestly superseded in this series by my player of the series, Mir, in the jungle. Really good to see him have a good series. Obviously, I've been pretty lower on him, I would say, over the course of the regular season, but talking about the final 2 weeks of the season and then playoffs, it's like, oh, okay, here's the guy that everybody's been talking about. And I know I've probably been a little bit more critical, I would say, than I probably should be. Like, I don't think he's a bad jungler. In fact, I think he's been a positive for Team Liquid all of the year. I just think that he gets a lot of hype as well, and I think this, this performance is definitely living up to that hype, if you will. 2 really good games of Wukong, some great engages, but most notably, a lot of really good early pressure in these games. That's the kind of thing that you have to do against a team like Golden Guardians. They get very comfortable, especially Young on a signature champion like Aurelia in game number 2. He's going to try and generate that lead early. You do not want him snowballing out of control. You want to try to catch him before he's able to do that. TL definitely prepped for that, and they definitely had a game plan going into that one that they were able to execute really well. But Mir, APA, the 2 standouts. Arrow and Kimdown were still solid. Bradley was really good on the top side, although the concept was far from the problem on Golden Guardians. Overall, Team Liquid is a unit. They were a really good team, and that's what makes them scary. There may be some players left in the tournament that are better than, APA or whoever you consider the best player on Team Liquid, but there is not many teams left in this tournament that are as cohesive and as well-rounded as what Team Liquid is right now. They are terrifying to have to go up against him. I certainly wouldn't want to have to do that in lower bracket. And unfortunately, Golden Guardians was given that task in this one. They just weren't able to get it done. Young is going to get my dud of the series. Pretty obviously, in my opinion, just 2 pretty poor games coming out on the Orianna and the Aurelia. Obviously, signature Aurelia pick. It's frustrating. He's got some high highs, but he's also got some low lows, and I've kind of acknowledged that. Of course, talked about that a bit at the end of the split, where it was like, ooh, I'm really not sure how I'm feeling about Young right now. That didn't necessarily carry over into some of their early playoff series. I talked about that earlier in the week when they were able to win, but, still the feast or famine nature of how he plays the game, kind of the really aggressive style that he plays, especially on these, melee bruiser carries like the Aurelia. It's always going to be punishable if the enemy team wants to punish it. If he gets the snowball and he gets, going out of control, it's going to be very difficult to stop, but if the enemy team kind of sees it coming and does everything they can to stop it, it's also going to be difficult for him to outplay something like that, and so that's unfortunate. It's obviously not just on him. I don't think Rosethorn was particularly good in this series. This is easily his worst series in quite a long time. He has really stepped it up in the recent weeks. Unfortunately, he ran into a super motivated Mir who is also playing at a really high level right now. And then I don't think Prisma was actually all that good. Array's positioning was definitely off every once in a while, but, it's whatever. As long as he's not dying, I don't really care. But Prisma was just being way too aggro on the Lulu. I get that you want to throw your life away for the Zeri sometimes, but I just feel like there were a lot of situations where you just didn't need to. There were a lot of fights that Golden Guardians took that I just didn't think they had to take, that I didn't really think that it benefited them to take. And so overall, unfortunately, this is going to be the end of the line for them. I would say an overachieving split. Like you can walk out of this and say you were 5th in the regular season, you only finished 7th, 8th, but I feel like this, if you told this team they were going to get 7th, 8th in spring at the beginning of the year, they probably would have taken that. And I think that that's fair. You've seen a lot of growth in your solo lanes, in your bot lane, in your jungle. this team looks cohesive and they look good. This is a team that could continue to grow as we head into summer. I'm sure they're going to be disappointed now with how they finished in the split, but this is a team that I definitely could see doing a lot better in just a couple of months. As for Team Liquid on the other side, again, this team is genuinely dangerous. Like, they are for real dangerous. This is not a team that you can take lightly at all. APA is going to punish you heavily if you do, and Mir is in that same boat. Bradley, one of the more dangerous top laners to go into, and Arrow and Kim Down really feel like they have gotten on the same page, maybe for the first time in 2023. And so Team Liquid, I'm really looking out for. They could be a very sneaky pick for a top, 3, top 4 kind of finish. That's the kind of upside this team has, and they really showed that off in this series. And now that we've wrapped up round number 3, it's time to jump into round number 4. And round 4 is certainly an interesting one. Only 6 teams remain in the playoffs. It's crazy that so many teams have already been eliminated, but only the top 6 remain. And it's time to get down to who is going to be making the top 4 in round number 4. We're going to be starting it off with upper bracket here, of course. These teams have yet to lose a series in the playoffs, so they still have an extra life, and they'll be showing that off later in the video, whoever loses, of course, when we get to lower bracket round 4. But to see who gets there, we've got to go through these first 2 series. Kicking us off, the top seed still in the tournament, the top seed in the tournament, all along. Cloud9 Challengers taking on the young upstarts, the dark horse of the NACL in 2023, Cincinnati Fear. I call them young, but what really they are is just good, right? Like, I feel like sometimes we convince ourselves that, young and inexperienced means that they're going to fall apart at times. That's not really been the case for the Fear at all in 2023. Now, obviously, I have to talk about this series, which I'm going to. Cloud9 definitely was the better team across these 2 games, especially in game number 1, but Cloud9 is just better than everybody. Let's be entirely honest. This team is stacked from top to bottom, and they showed it in this series. We've been talking about it all up until this point in the playoffs. Basically, everybody that they've gone up against has not stood a chance against this team, whether it's been in the regular season or in the playoffs. 23-7 doesn't necessarily equate to the level of dominance that they showed, especially towards the back half of the split, and I think that definitely came out in this series. We can talk about it. Player of the series was actually kind of hard. A lot of players played really well on the side of Cloud9. I want to give a lot of praise to, obviously, both the carry roles, which we'll get into, but Fake God and Tomio, who were also really good in this series. Fake God, some really good engages on the Gnar in Game 2, and Tomio, perfect timing on some of the Vi ultimates in Game 2 as well, in my opinion. But player of the series ended up coming down to which one of the 2 carry roles did I want to give, the big green bar to, and I ended up settling on Diplex in the mid lane. He was really good in this series. The RE game was incredibly important in Game 2. We'll talk about Fear's comps a bit, I guess now, because they're definitely intriguing. They very much went for I don't know. I want to say late game comps in game number 1, but, Cho'Gath mid is always going to scale to me that you're going to want to play a little bit more for late game, obviously. Bringing the Aphelios in, even something like the Sejuani, you want to play through that Olaf in the top lane, try and generate a lead there, and then use your abundant tankiness to be able to enable this Aphelios to just front to back in the late game. Unfortunately, if you don't get to that point, it's quite difficult. Tomio was able to generate quite a big, large lead in game number 1 and just kind of, scale the game out of control. Aurelion Sol got pretty strong as well in that one. And then in game number 2, back and forth plays, I would say Cloud9 was definitely on top for most of it. I like this draft coming out from Fear. Gragas Yasuo is something we're just not seeing a lot of right now. I think Yasuo is just kind of feast or famine. He can definitely work, and he can definitely be a very positive pick, but there are just going to be times where his effectiveness is entirely reliant on the rest of his team being able to follow up on it. And unfortunately, that kind of felt like what game number 2 was. Not saying that everybody on the team was bad, but just not enough gold to actually be able to do what Yasuo wanted to do. Let's talk about Cloud9 first. I'm getting ahead of myself. Diplex was awesome on the Asol, on the Ahri. He's just too good for this level, at least my perception of it, right? You can talk about the laning, and I do think that there are flaws in the early laning phase, but I think you could actively say that he is the best team fighter in the mid lane position in the NACL, and I don't even think it's really that close. I mean, there's a lot of really good ones. Shochi on the other side is also a really good team fighter, but Diplex is just... He's too good for this, right? He was in the LCS for a reason. He was on a very good LCS team for a reason. He was being productive. Now, obviously, he had some bad moments. That's the reason he's down here in the NACL now. But, there's a reason that he was in the LCS. That's all I will say. He is a really, really solid player and he showed that off in the series. And I want to give a lot of credit to Lost and Zeyzal. Again, I know that some people are pretty low on Lost, just generally speaking, because of the narrative surrounding him. He's been given chances at the LCS level with TSM, with Immortals, and he's never really been able to put it together, and so he just feels like one of these guys that's going to dominate the NACL and then not be able to cut it at the LCS level. I hate that narrative. I hate that ideology, because players change and improve and, you know, regress and, you know, at different levels, right? You could have a year where you're really good, you could have a year where you're really bad, and your overall skill level might have not fluctuated a ton in that time frame. And for Lost, I think it's all just about confidence with him. He played with a lot of confidence in this series, especially in that game number 2 on the Zeri. You can talk about how he was willing to go and try and take risks because he knew he had some backup plans. He had, you know, stuns coming out from the rest of his team. He had stopwatch, especially in that last fight. Impressive stuff. He's jumping over the wall. He's trying to initiate things. That's what I want to see out of an AD carry. I know I'm a little bit biased in terms of how I grade those kinds of players on this channel, but the more aggressive, the better, most of the time, I should say. Don't int the game away, but, like, try to make your plays. If you can pull them off, you can pull them off. And Lost is an incredibly talented player. It's good to see him get his confidence back. I think playing with Zeyzal has done a lot of that. I think playing with Tomio has done a lot of that. These are players that have instilled confidence in a lot of the players that they have played with over the past year, just in general. And I think that has definitely translated to Cloud9 Challenger here. And just in general, it's really hard not to talk about this team and just, you know, gush over how talented they are and how well they've been playing recently. They're a lot of fun to watch, and they deserve all of the credit that they are going to get for winning the series. But unfortunately, someone had to lose, and that was the fear in this one. I still really like this team. Cloud9's one of those opponents that you just kind of have to raise your arms up and go, eh. But this was kind of a really weird series. Game 2 was a very weird game. Manui actually had a lot of gold here on the Jinx in game number 2, and you're playing with that Yasuo Gragas. I could absolutely see a world in which teamfights go in their direction. If, you know, a few things swing a different way, it just ended up not really working out for them. Shochi, I thought, made some good plays, some good Yasuo ults, but just no damage following up on them. I was a little bit concerned with how Manui was playing some of the late game team fights. Again, not that he was bad, I want to see that aggression. That's what I like to see out of AD carries. I want to see them take the game into their own hands, but I have to give out a dud of the series, and for me, it's going to go to Perry in the jungle. I hate saying this because I love Perry, and he has been by far the biggest surprise of the split to me. Not a surprise. I was high on him going into the season, but, like, dude's a top 5 player in the NACL. I mean, like, full stop, you know what I mean? He is awesome. It just was a hard matchup for him going into Tomio in this one. You've got that scaling comp in game 1, you lose the pressure early, Vi's going to be able to dominate the map, and then you just kind of lose control. It's okay, it happens every once in a while, but the Gragas, it's just not a great game coming out from him. You really need to see more of that aggression, and Cloud9 did a great job, obviously, shutting him down, but jungle pressure was firmly in favor of Tomio in this series, and that's unfortunate. I still think Perry is an awesome jungler, and obviously, I still think that he's been one of the single best players in the NACL over the course of the split so far, but just worth pointing out. I think Fear will be fine. They move down to lower bracket now. Obviously, no easy games left. We've just talked about the two teams, you know, that one of which that they will be facing in the next round, you know, either FlyQuest or Team Liquid, which is not a particularly easy series. We'll get to that later in the video, but, you know, Fear, if anybody's going to be able to do it, it's absolutely them. They've been defying expectations all split long. Why stop now? As for Cloud9 on the other side, this team just feels unstoppable when they get to play their game, when they get to set the tempo early, and when they get to just kind of feel the game out, right? When Lost and Diplex can play super aggro and be able to kind of express themselves in team fights, Cloud9 just feels like a team that you're really going to have to take out of their comfort zone in order to beat them, and it's just a very tall task to even get them to that point. And then moving on to our second upper bracket series of round number 4. And it's a battle between the 2 and the 3 seeds in the NACL. We had Dignitas Challengers taking on 100 Thieves Challengers. And Dignitas is able to pick up a win. I'm so excited to see this. I know I've doubted this team quite a bit, but it's not because I don't like them or anything, or that I have anything against the org or the players. I like the players a lot. In fact, I'm pretty notoriously high on some of these players. Spawn in particular is someone who I've really stuck my neck out for on this channel over the past, what, like 2 years or so. To see Dignitas continue to perform well and continue to be legitimately just clearly one of the best teams in the NACL, it's just a great look for this roster and for this organization, and I think they're doing it in ways that make me feel even more confident about believing in this team in the future as well. You know, not only 2-0s, but the players that are stepping up and the players that are actively playing well. First of all, it's all of them. It's not a specific player that is stepping up and just dominating. Everyone on this team is playing at a ridiculously high level, but it's people who have continued to play at a high level, people who I've been a little bit more critical on than maybe the consensus, like, NACL analysts that I've seen, and just generally, like, everybody has been playing well in the playoffs, and it's really good to see. My player of the series is going to go to Insanity in the mid lane. I've been very critical of Insanity, and I feel like I have to defend it because I see posts everywhere, people talking about how he's been the best mid laner in the NACL this split. I don't agree with that, and obviously, you know, I still think Insanity is probably one of the top 3 most talented mid laners in the league. It's not like I'm sitting here saying that he's some sort of schmuck, but I don't think this split was necessarily up to his standards, in my opinion. When he, you know, we went into the year kind of assuming that he was, quite frankly, going to be the #1 mid in the league, and that it wasn't going to be particularly close because of the talent level and the consistency that he's shown at this level, and I just don't think I was necessarily, like MVP blown away every single game by Insanity. That's why I've been critical. Again, I want to reiterate this enough. There is almost no player in the NACL that I don't like, at least that I'm not cheering for or rooting for. I just do kind of want to call it how I see it, and I think that Insanity's hype has maybe taken over a bit of the narrative around him, but not in this series. He was awesome in this series. He's going into someone who I actually compare him to quite a bit on the channel in Pretty. I think Pretty is also having a pretty down season, if you will, and I think Insanity just kind of proved that he was a lot better in this series. Both of them have been good at this level, but Insanity's just kind of been on a different level, and it's good to see him step up, be really good on both LeBlanc and Talia, 2 champions that obviously kind of go for a little bit of a different play style, but generally speaking can have the same major impact on the game overall, especially in terms of the macro that your team ends up wanting to play. And so Insanity coming out and looking great is great for Dig. Spawn and Diamond continue to be solid. Of course, I'm a Spawn defender. He was unreal in Academy last year in 2022. He absolutely deserved that call up towards the back half of the year, and he deserved to have his spot on Dignitas at the beginning of the year with what he had offered in the NAC, or in Academy, I guess, last year. But fortunately, things don't work out. He's come back down, and he's immediately become one of the best AD carries at this level again, like instantaneously. He really is super good mechanically, and I know the early laning phases can be a little up and down, but you're not going to find a lot of AD carries that are this consistent in team fights, especially from neutral. I love Spawn, and I love what he's been able to do for this team. Diamond obviously helps. He's one of the best, if not the best support at this level. Obviously, Destiny and Trevor are going to kind of make an argument there as well, but Diamond is right there for me. Hoon has really blown the top off of my expectations this year, and XU was already my #1 ranked jungler going into the split, and so Dignitas performing well is certainly not a surprise to me. It's just really good to see it here in the playoffs after it felt like towards the end of the season they couldn't escape a 1-1 draw if they tried in the BO2s. So to see them not really be dropping games here when the games actually start to matter, that's probably the best sign they could have possibly given me. As for 100 Thieves on the other side, good and bad with this team. There are a couple players on this team I've been very high on. A couple players on this team I've been, I think, lower than consensus on. I think you can talk about me being lower, with the consensus on Insanity in particular. You could say the exact same thing about Yukino on the other side. And obviously very different situations, with Insanity being more of a veteran presence that I think isn't living up to maybe his past splits, like utter dominance in the mid lane. And Yukino, on the other hand, this super hyped prospect, the youngest player in the league, alongside his teammate, who's not playing right now, obviously, so he's the youngest player in the league, that I just don't think has clicked, in my opinion, in the same way that a lot of people like to say that he has. I think he's gotten a pretty nice deal with a lot of winning lanes basically every game. Not to say that he's been bad by any means. Again, I don't want this to be misconstrued, but I think Yukino has maybe looked a little bit better because of 100 Thieves around him, and now that he's gone up against someone like XU, who can really take advantage of some of the positioning mistakes and some of the tempo and, mistakes, I guess, that he makes early on in games, I think he does get exposed a bit. It's the reason he's going to get my dud of the series. Now, obviously, if he ends up being the #1 jungler in the entire NACL by the end of the year, I'm not going to be shocked. He has that kind of upside, and he's shown flashes of that. Absolutely, but I think the consistency is still something I'm a little bit worried about. Unforgiven and Destiny were so good in the regular season that, for me, Yukino honestly got a little bit overshadowed. But when Unforgiven and Destiny aren't, dominating in the bot lane and really creating large advantages, and Sniper in that same way in the top lane, obviously, but he's not here. When Unforgiven and Destiny aren't doing that, this team really does struggle to generate early leads, and we kind of saw that here. I really didn't like a lot of what I saw from 100 Thieves in either of these games. To me, it felt like a team that kind of rolled over and died. They felt like they weren't on the same level as Dignitas, and that's not a particularly good sign, knowing that you still have to play another series, a best of 5 even, before this weekend is over. You got to get your stuff together. Yukino's going to need to get more consistent. He's going to need to step up because the junglers do not get easier from this point onwards. Unforgiven and Destiny have to be the superstar bot lane that they are supposed to be. Destiny, in my opinion, was the most impactful player to his team in the regular season, or he is definitely at least in that conversation, and Unforgiven is definitely right there with them. You can make a real argument they were the best bot lane in the regular season, and it's time to show that when the games matter in the playoffs. Darshan was not stable. He was not solid on the top side of the map. Hoon, a good top laner, was able to destroy him, and that's a weakness that could potentially be opened up, and I think Pretty has been someone who has been giving away a lot of resources because of his passive play for a lot of the year. 100 Thieves has some major question marks to answer going into that best of 5 that might determine the rest of their split, but obviously they have the talent to be able to answer it. It's just about bringing it out. As for Dignitas, you made it. Your winners finals, you've done it. You've actually gotten there. You're going to face Cloud9, later on next week. I'm not going to be talking about that in this video. It hasn't happened yet, but the fact that they're even here is a win. I know they're the number 2 seed, but I know a lot of people also did not predict this team to be able to make it here, me included. So to see them be able to do it, it's just such a huge positive for a Dignitas team that I'm really glad to see is genuinely reaching their potential. That's going to bring us to our final 2 series of the video here, and we're going to be changing formats a bit. The entire tournament up until this point, we've been talking about best of 3s. Well, we are past the best of 3 stage now. We have entered best of 5s. I'm incredibly excited to go over them. There are so many more things that can happen in a best of 5, but here's where you are really sure which team is the better team on each individual day. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Every team will have the opportunity to be able to prove what they are now. And that's going to kick off with our first matchup. Of course, any teams that lose here are officially eliminated. By the end of this, we're going to learn our top 4 in the spring split of 2023 in the NACL. So let's kick it off with a matchup between the 3-seeded 100 Thieves Challengers and the 9-seeded Team Liquid Challengers. And we get an upset here as TLC is able to take the series in 4 games. 100 Thieves has officially been eliminated in joint 5th, 6th place. Incredibly disappointing from them. I mean, we'll get to them in a bit because I'm not surprised by this. There are going to be a lot of people out there that are surprised by this. I've seen a lot of takes where, TL obviously is overperforming and people knew they were good, but 100 Thieves was one of those teams that they had 3 MVP candidates, maybe even 4, with Sniper and everything, and, TL just had, a couple of good players, right? They were a good unit, but I'll get into why maybe the perception and the conversation surrounding 100 Thieves was maybe a little bit different than what I viewed it as, and why I think this isn't particularly surprising to me, and why I actually called for them to be out early in the tournament in my prediction as well. So let's talk about TLC first. I like to talk about the positives first. This team just clicks. Like, there really is no other way to put it. This team has just figured out how to play together as a unit, and I think that is absolutely massive for them. Yes, they're going to be able to bring out some of these weird, wacky picks. Ziggs mid, right? Malphite top. Not that that's crazy anymore. It's pretty standard, especially into, like, Wukong, Aphelios, Scion, right? Like, you can do so much with that. But I think generally speaking, they're not afraid to play what they're comfortable playing, and they know the style that they like to go towards. They know their main players, they know their key contributors, they know that Mir is going to be able to take advantage of junglers who make mistakes. He's really good at punishing the mistakes that other junglers make, and we'll get to Yukino in the series, but you know you can count on APA to be a super consistent damage threat in the mid to late game. And Arrow, oh my god, his best series of the playoffs. He completely stepped up here now. I know there's going to be some negative talk surrounding Arrow because there were some games where he was down like 50 CS. But dude, he was down 50 CS because he was up 7 kills, right? I'm going to take that. You're up in gold. I'm going to take that. You know what I mean? I'll happily sacrifice, a bit of CS in order to go up 1 or 2k gold on my opponent. And that's what Arrow did in this game. Obviously, 100 Thieves really felt that, going to Unforgiven and trying to get him back in the game was the best way they could have possibly won. I agree. We'll get to that in a bit because he was their shining light in this series. But Arrow was awesome, and there's really not a lot of negatives I can give to him. I think his laning stats aren't perfect. Like, again, his laning pressure isn't amazing, but he's just so well-rounded. I think that's the best way to put it. I think that's the best way to put Team Liquid as a team, is they're so well-rounded. It's not like they're dominant in one particular area of the game. They're great early, or they're great mid, or they're great late. They just are really good in in every area of the game. They just kind of have a good idea of where they want to be and how they want to play the game, and Arrow is a good example of that. Getting ahead a ton of Jinx in this series, ends up pulling out the Varus and shooting those arrows in game number 4. Always fun when he pulls out that champion for the memes, but, Kim Down was really big in being able to enable that as well. A lot of enchanters. Renata this series was actually really, really big. Those ultimates can obviously be incredibly crucial when the enemy AD carry is relatively strong, and then, in game number 3, bringing out the Braum, that's where it ended up not working out too much. But overall, the bot lane has been a massive positive in this video in the past few rounds. Really, really good stuff coming out from TLC. APA is the heart and soul of everything they run through. I know a scoreline doesn't necessarily say that. 8-7 and 22 doesn't exactly give you that, interpretation, but go watch these games. It is so clear that his presence and his ability to, set the tempo in the mid lane and be able to roam to a lot of plays, his willingness to fight in the mid game and play with the rest of his team in a sort of macro sense rather than just try to farm up in the mid lane. It's so important to how TLC likes to play the game, and they play around him in that sense. The action is often where he is. He really is one of the most important players left in the NACL to their team's active success, and I think he's going to get a lot of the credit for it, and honestly, I think a lot of it is deserved. He's been fantastic. Obviously it's a team effort, but APA is definitely playing out of his mind right now. Mirror has been really good. I already talked about that in the playoff run. Bradley's ridiculously consistent. He dominated that matchup in the top lane against Darshan. Overall, there's just not a lot of negatives I could possibly give TLC in this series. A best of 5 that they were able to take in 3 against one of the best teams in the league pretty handily without a lot of hiccups in the middle. Yeah, sign me up for that. That's pretty darn good. That's a pretty darn good way to get yourself in the top 4. And then 100 Thieves on the other side. Let me explain why this isn't particularly surprising to me, because I know a lot of people out there are shocked by the fact that 100 Thieves ended up losing this series, but again, I've kind of been talking about it. Yukino's been in the MVP discussion from a lot of the analysts, a lot of the, the people that commentate on the NACL. I haven't seen that. I think he's a good player, and he's a top jungler in the league, but I don't think he's the most important player to 100 Thieves, and I think especially when you start to look into his mid games, a lot of the pressure that he's able to put on in the early game either translates or he loses, right? It is very similar to a player that I talk about all the time in my LPL reviews named Hang on Team WE, where it's man, these early game plans that he's able to make are really smart. He's able to generate leads, and then he gets to the mid game and he has no idea what to do with that lead. I feel like Yukino suffers from that problem at least a little bit, and that was very apparent in this series. That was the problem in the jungle, in my opinion, in this series, is it really felt like Yukino had no idea what to do in the mid game, even if he did have gold. Now, oftentimes TLC would have a very good early game, and so Yukino would be going into the mid game at a disadvantage, but a lot of that was just lack of pressure on the map. 100 Thieves never really felt like they were in control in any of these games besides game 3, and game 3 was a very different situation. So I'm going to give Yukino dud of the series. I know some people are going to kind of push back on that, and I know a lot of people have pushed back on my narrative that Yukino is maybe a little bit, he's been skyrocketed to the top of lists, I think, a little bit too soon. Again, I don't want to use the term overrated or overhyped or anything like that, because I don't think he is. I don't think that the talent that Yukino has is overrated. I don't think the talent that Yukino has is overhyped. I do think that his impact in Spring Split 2023 has been a little bit over-talked about. I don't think he's in the MVP conversation for me. I would put the bot lane duo on his team in that conversation ahead of him, but shout out to the bot lane. They tried their best. Unforgiven actually had a pretty good series. He really didn't make any mistakes, and he was actually able to generate a lot of gold for the team. He was good in team fights, unfortunately. Everything was kind of on fire by that point. Destiny was not particularly good in the series. The Nautilus engages just weren't really working. It's kind of hard to do that from behind, and then Darshan in the top lane was, quite frankly, running it in some of these games. Overall, not great for 100 Thieves. Not a great way to end your split, but again, you don't even have your full roster here. You can talk about Darshan being in, not being a huge downgrade, because Sniper, Darshan is a good player, but Sniper is better. Sniper is a better top laner, and he was cohesive with the rest of the team, and he was showing marginal improvement over the course of the year. You're going to want to wait to assess this entire roster and what they're going to be able to do at their max power until he is back in the team, assuming he is back in the team for summer. Obviously, no rush back. I have no idea what the situation is, but his health always comes first and his mental always comes first. But I'm going to give them a little bit of a pass. They have a new top laner for playoffs, and it didn't end up working out. I do think they have some kinks that they need to work out before they head into summer. But at the very least, you're a good team. You just need to make sure that good team can turn into great team. As for TLC, here we are. We finally hit the true point where this team should have been all along, which is here in the top 4, right? This is never a team that should have been this low. Now, I was low on them in the preseason power rankings, but every worry that I had kind of got alleviated. APA was better than I thought he would be. Kim Down was better than I thought he would be. Mirror was better than I thought he would be. I'm no longer worried about TLC. They have proven everything that they needed to prove. They are one of the most dangerous teams in the league, and honestly, who's surprised? That is just simply what this Team Liquid organization does. And that's going to bring us to our final series that we're going to cover in this video. The final series to determine our 4th team to enter top 4, an elimination series best of 5 between Cincinnati Fear and FlyQuest Challengers that Cincinnati Fear is able to take. What a win. Are you kidding me? Obviously, they've had an unbelievable year up until this point. There is no doubting that. No one had Fear as a top 4 team in the NACL. No one. As optimistic as you could have possibly been about this team in the preseason, you could not have had them top 4. That is just insane. But here they are. They have officially made it into the top 4 by beating one of the teams that a lot of people considered one of the tournament favorites, with a true frontrunner for MVP on their side. An unreal run from Fear, and one of the best series of the year. I mean, this is, in my opinion, the most fun series of the playoffs so far. This was a treat for viewers. I mean, truthfully, not only are they generous in letting us cheer for them, but they're putting on phenomenal games as well. How can you not like the Fear? Really, really good series coming out from them. It's hard to kind of narrow it down and analyze it because there were a lot of twists and turns, and I don't want to make this a 45-minute retrospective on the series, but Fear and Fly trading pressure throughout the games. Fear did a really good job in game number 1 to be able to close out that win. Really good job from Manui in the back half of the game to be able to deal a lot of damage on that Aphelios. Then game number 2, Fly C fights right back. Spirax, Masu, everybody playing well. Game 3, Fear is like, nope, that was a fluke. I'm good. We're good again. Manui's great. Faisal in particular is really good in that game. And then Flyc's like, hey, I don't want to lose. Game 5, here we go. Our first game 5 of the NACL split so far, and it did not disappoint. I know that this maybe was like the least close game of the entire series, but still, how can you not watch these games and just go, this is what it's like to be an NACL fan. This is the reason we're all here, right? You know, you can take your LCSs and your LECs and your LCKs and your LPLs. The NACL is where it's at, and this is why. Let's talk about Fear and why they were so good in this series. Everybody stepped up. I feel really bad, again, that I can only give one person player of the series. That is, unfortunately, how the award works. I'm going to give it to Faisal in the top lane. He was so good in this series. His Cassante is just kind of on a different level. I know games 2 and 4 weren't perfect for Fear, but even then, Faisal was doing a lot of damage in that top lane matchup, and when he was allowed to get unlocked in some of these games, it was devastating to watch. One of the most fun series I've seen coming from a top laner in the NACL in quite a while. Hell, from any region in quite a while. Top lane's one of those roles where you're just not going to have as many opportunities to shine as, you know, maybe some of the other roles, no matter how mechanically talented you are, but Faisal has certainly broken that mold. He has shown that he is truly one of the most mechanically talented players in the NACL, regardless of position, and it doesn't really matter what you put him on. He's going to be a game changer regardless. I've been incredibly high on him all split long, and this is why. An incredible performance from him. He dominated the top lane matchup. I really wanted to give this to Shochi in the mid lane. What a great series. It's going to go under the radar because you can look around at the rest of the team and, you know, 40 kills on Manui and Faisal dominating in some of these games, but Shochi was everywhere. Like, he was impacting the map so much. That Tristana game in Game 5 sticks out to me as a really good one. That Annie game in Game 1 really sticks out as a really good one. Just an incredible performance from the solo laners. Those were the two that really stuck out. Obviously, Manui and Trevor. I mean, 40 kills on Manui in 5 games. 79 assists on Trevor in 5 games. A ridiculous stat line, and they played to back it up. A lot of late game carries. They even pull out kind of the swap here with the AD mid laner, the AP bot laner. You're going Vigar Rel in game number 5. Super bold call with your entire season on the line, but it absolutely pays off. Shochi's great in the mid lane on the Trist. Manui's great in the bot lane on the Vigar. They've clearly practiced this before. What a win. Like, it's hard for me not to gush over this team. Everybody played well. Perry as well. I don't want to take anything away from him. He was really good in the early games of a lot of their wins. There's nothing to take away from anybody on Fear. This was the kind of performance that solidifies your kind of mental appearance in the top 4. Like, this proves it's not an accident. This is not a fluke. You proved it against one of the most dangerous teams in the league in FlyQuest Challengers. And speaking of them, an unfortunate way to end your split. This team probably felt like they were a shoo-in for top 4 with how they were playing over the back half of the split. I know a lot of analysts agreed, me included. I thought this was a team that was going to kind of confidence boost their way into that top 4 after getting a lot of their players in and solidifying their roster, but they end up falling here to a really good Cincinnati Fear team, and honestly, you can't even really blame them. They put up such a fight in this series. Basically, everybody playing well. Again, I feel really bad that I have to give a dud of the series in this one because, generally speaking, everyone in this series held their weight, especially in their wins. Not only for Fly, but for Fear. And so, to pick somebody that was, kind of overshadowed in the game feels a little bit unfortunate. It feels like, kind of against the point of what this channel is about anyways. It's to highlight, the good in League rather than kind of focus on the negative. So I'll quickly just say that Philip is my dud of the series, but even Philip had some really fantastic moments in this series. Masu and Winsome were still really good. They didn't necessarily get to take over, especially in Fear's wins, nearly as much as they did in a lot of other games, but when they did get the opportunity to carry, like that Jinx game too, like you really got to see it. SpearX had some good moments, but it just wasn't hyper consistent. Winsome was so aggro on these super tanky, beefy boys down in the support position. There was a lot of positives to take away here for FlyC. Unfortunately, it just was not enough to be able to overcome the power of the Fear, and so their season, their split is over now, and obviously you've got ridiculous amounts of upside moving into summer. This is a team I'm not really worried about at all. If they went on to win summer in 2023, I wouldn't be surprised at all, but unfortunately spring was just not going to be it for them, and this is the end of the line, perhaps, for the MVP of the split. And then on the other side, I can't rave enough about how happy and excited I am that not only this series was as fun as it was, but that Fear are able to advance to the top 4. They are the easiest team to root for in the entire world. The players are fun, the personalities are awesome, they play fantastic, and they really, really deserve to be here, and it's just a blast to watch. I'm incredibly happy and excited for this team, but the journey's not over. This team could absolutely reach higher than top 4. They have a really interesting series that we'll preview in kind of the outro here, but let's just say if Fear managed to get even more out of this split, I wouldn't be shocked. All right, that is going to do it for my NACL playoffs round 3, 4, and a little bit of round 2 overview and analysis. I really do appreciate you guys. I said this at the beginning, but I appreciate you guys' patience. I appreciate you letting me do all of the weekend videos in one. It really does, clear up the schedule a lot. As you guys know, I've been posting every single day, and I will be up until the end of playoffs, basically in every major region. That's 33 straight days in a row, 34 of 35 days as we go throughout March and April. I really appreciate you guys' patience. As you know, I still do have a full-time job. This is just a hobby for me. I don't make any money off of these vids, and so it's all for the passion, it's all for the love, and you guys have shown a lot of support, especially on these videos, and I really, really do appreciate it. As for previewing what the next round has to offer, in the next video, not only are we going to be covering round number 5, but we'll be covering the semifinals as well. So everything leading up until the NACL finals, and I'm incredibly excited to go over it in that video, but my predictions: Cloud9 over Dignitas Challengers, Fear over TLC. I know it's kind of wild, it's crazy, not a lot of people are going to pick it, but I truly do think that that's going to happen. As for Dig versus Fear in that instance, I have no idea. Fear might be able to take it, but Dig is a very, very scary team to have to go up against. Either way, we're going to get some banger matches, and I'm incredibly excited for it. If you guys are excited for it as well, and if you did enjoy the video, let me know down in the comment section below. And of course, like the video if you did enjoy it. If you made it through an hour and 12 minutes of me talking about NACL action, you're probably going to like a lot of the other content on my channel, so hit the subscribe button. Of course, like I said, I'm posting everything, all playoff, every region, everything that you could possibly want if you're a LoL Esports fan on this channel, 33 straight days in a row. LCS, LCK, LEC, LPL, NACL, everything. And so if you're interested in that, hit the subscribe button if you're new. But, of course, with all that being said, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.